Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to Nutmegged, the podcast where a Yank and a Brit talk about the beautiful game from across the pond. I am Andrew, representing the Stars and Stripes, and we have Faisal holding down the crown in the UK. Faisal, how's it going?
All good, thanks. It's a cold night, but we're here ready to discuss lots of great football stuff at the moment. So excited to get into this one.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of time. We've taken a break to do some vacations and to do a lot of research because so much stuff has happened between now and our last episode. So a lot of good stuff, as you had mentioned, to talk about. So let's dive right in. We're going to talk about some of the recent games and the drama associated with them that have been going down. And the first, we're going to talk about the one nearest and dearest to our hearts, the Manchester United game, and they're actually looking good, back in the top six. It feels like a little bit of a miracle because, to me at least, from the outside looking in, I've talked about it before, it still feels like the club is still unorganized, kind of a mess, but at least results are somewhat coming their way. So let's talk about the game between them and Everton really quick. How did it look to you, a 3-0 victory?
Yeah, 3-0, 6 points off top now. So it doesn't look as gloomy as it was. If you listen to a couple of our previous episodes, we tend to go on quite long rants about Manchester United. The only rant we're going to talk about is one person's goal and one goal, which was in the first 3 minutes, of course. And it's been streamed everywhere. You've probably seen it on various Twitter pieces or X, however you want to call it, on various kind of sort of threads and Instagram, etc. Is the Garnacho goal. Fantastic goal. We're already saying it's a goal of the season, in my opinion. I think that it's going to be hard to top that goal this season already. I think it's a cracker. But it is 3 minutes to the game. You've got a great ball in from Dallo again, who's been fantastic on the wings for us and in that sort of left back, right back position when he's needed. With the ball in, and you've got Garnacho, young Garnacho, right? He's 19, 20, is he? Quite young. Ball comes over and he's running away from the ball, does a Wayne Rooney-esque overhead kick into the top left. It's an incredible. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's a fantastic goal. Then we'll get back into that goal in 1 second. But when you talk about obviously the Rashford penalty, which is great. Initially, it goes to VAR. I think it's meant to be considered as a dive for Martial, and then it's been pulled back as a penalty. And I'm thinking, surely this is a Fernandes stepping up, right? Like Fernandes is our penalty taker. It goes to Rashford. I can't lie, I'm a bit nervous. I'm seeing him step up, and then it's a cracker into the top net. I mean, it's a great penalty, and it's beautifully finished off with a Martial. Great goal. He just dinks over the keeper. Great balling from Bruno Fernandes. So great game for him. Stand out as well within that was obviously Cobby mainly. Before I get into Cobby, because I think he deserves his time. Andrew, that Garnacho goal, what are you thinking versus Wayne Rooney? You thinking does it top it?
It does for me. So I was watching when that actually happened, and it felt surreal to actually be a part of that and watch the game as it happened live. It's so cool to be a part of the goals like that and to watch and just take it in during the actual run of play, because it's awesome to rewatch it and see it, but to see it happen is just so cool. The announcer said, yeah, amazing goal, so good, but the only bad part was he kind of shinned it. But if you watch it, he doesn't really shin it. If you want to see a goal that was shinned, Rooney's. So Rooney's bicycle kick goes right off of the shin. Still amazing goal, of course. It's against Man City, so it's great. It's historic. But this one was much better. Kind of hits right in that ankle, right where the curve is. So that's what you want. That's how you bike a ball. And it was just absolutely fantastic for me. It is better than Rooney's goal. It comes at a time where it's needed. It's in the 3rd minute of this game, and you're still kind of shaky of hey, is Man United even going to be able to do something? They struggle against these teams that are in the lower half of the table for some reason. So having that goal happen when it does is important, but then also the beauty of that goal is just insane. The athleticism, the funny part that the announcers did say too, they have to have someone that's young and flexible to be able to contort your body to do something like that. It's so true. I could not imagine putting my body into that position to try to score a goal and timing it appropriately and then not falling down and hurting myself. So that is just a magnificent goal. And I think it's the goal of the season. I don't think we'll see anything better, but I think it's the goal of the season for the past 3 Premier League seasons. There's really not been anything better than that.
I couldn't agree more. It is, like I said, it's really beautifully hit on that sweet spot. Fantastic. Even the celebration as well. A little Ronaldo-esque celebration at the end as well. It's great, especially for a youngster as well, to have that sort of performance, put that performance in as well. Speaking of youngsters as well, we have to obviously shout out Kobe Mainu, who was out with injury at the beginning of the. I think we saw him in they call the friendlies of the warm up, and maybe in the first game potentially, in the start of the season, the pre games, sort of like the friendlies, and was fantastic there. Injured, and now he came back. It's his first starting lineup. 18 years old, I think it is, and his performance for me, playing the role of like three midfielders in one moment, just beautiful on the ball. Like if you see the ball, like how he goes into every tackle, how he, in my opinion, he probably outplays of that kind of Casemiro and the Amrabat role personally. I don't think there's any better in our squad in that space. And it almost is feel. And if there was like I think I saw a tweet somewhere talking about how it was, if Michael Carrick and Pogba were watching that performance, they'd have smiles, big smiles on their faces, because that was incredible performance. And I said this to you already, and I'll post this back to you. We're winning the league with Kobe Mainu, right? I think we all agree that's all set, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's not what I predicted before all of this. Anyway, I still have Liverpool going up the top. But I want to throw one thing to you very quickly. I want to give you the specific stats from this game and to see if that changes your perspective at all. So again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier in this question. I still don't feel that the organization is there for United, even though they've been getting results, somehow grinding it out with a lot of 1-0 wins. It's been a little bit intense. And like in the last 15 points, they've only dropped 3 or something like that. And it was to Man City in the derby. So like they have been going strong, contrary to how I feel. However, let's look at the breakdown of this game against Everton. So Everton had 24 shots. Man United had 9. Granted, you take shots, you're like, okay, cool. It really depends on your shots on target that are actually going to make the impact. There were 6 on target for Everton, 4 for Man United. If we're talking about possession, Everton had 51%, so that leaves 49% for United. Completed passes, 443 for Everton, 444 for United, so almost the exact same there. Passing accuracy, 77% for Everton, 76 for United. Fouls, 10 for Everton, 8 for United. One of the issues for Everton was their fouling. They ended up getting 3 yellow cards to none for United and 2 offsides, both for each. 6 corners for Everton, 5 for United. So overall, I think that Everton ultimately wins out in terms of looking at the stats. And if you would say, okay, who won this game by not knowing anything else, you'd probably say that Everton would win because they ended up looking statistically like the better team, which we all know football, that doesn't really happen. However, does that change your opinion on how well you think Manchester City or Manchester United perform in this game?
I think it does. And I think if you look at the numbers, Man United were probably behind. But as we all know, football is about scoring the goals, right? Like I said, after that first 3 minutes, after that Garnacho goal, that 20 minutes after, 20, 30 minutes afterwards, we're under the cosh here fully. Like it's Kobe Mainu off the line. So we think about there's two like goal line, like performance, like off the line stuff here. So like it's not easy. They are putting on such a solid performance. I think I saw a stat in the second half where I think it was 17 on shots for Manchester United and then 9 for Everton, or some sort of stat about that. And I thought that second half was much better as a team. I felt like we had something to hold on to. We could see that Everton were literally on us, and you could feel the audience, like the whole crowd, every single time they were anywhere near the like Man United's box. There was just that crowd, those fans trying to will the ball in. I could feel it, and for me, seeing those figures as well, and it makes total sense. Like, you know, we still, I think, are running our luck, and in my opinion, this might be that if Garnacho doesn't score that goal, we probably go on to maybe draw potentially. That's my opinion. I think everyone's a bit shocked that it's a great goal, and then you're seeing us just basically just holding the ball back, trying to take off the line, score and stuff. So, interesting one. On paper, 100% Everton probably should have took it, but the goals weren't in the net, Everton. You've got to put the ball in the net. unfortunately. We'll see how it pans out. I mean, we've got a whole season is still quite, it's not early, but around the Christmas time, that's when we're going to see a real interesting look at the league. So we'll take it from there, I think.
And the league is so tight, which is so fun. But what you did mention is so important. Like, you have to have difference makers on your team to score goals, to create those opportunities. And United does have a lot of those difference makers. Now it kind of just comes to creating a symbiotic relationship with the entire roster. So hopefully Ten Hag looks like he's shoving things in the right direction. Hopefully they keep moving that way. Let's talk about another game that happened that is quite important for the title race and the top of the table. Liverpool versus City. And we always love when we see City dropping points, and they did indeed. We also like to see that for the top of the league race. So that game ended 1-1. Trent Alexander-Arnold with a goal, not in my fantasy team, unfortunately. And Erling Haaland also banging one in himself. Talk to me about the game. What are your thoughts?
It is, for me, back to the game of old where you have two teams who really are fighting at the top. Like, it felt like a game of old. Before going into it, very much felt like maybe Arsenal are in that space, maybe Spurs are in that space. There was almost like maybe the qualities now maybe spread out amongst four teams. I think in the previous season, perhaps even the season before, it felt a bit like a Man City versus Liverpool game. Those games were huge. Everyone sat in and you made sure you watched that Liverpool versus Man City game. But it was a great game. And for me, we were speaking about it just a bit earlier before we spoke about this. But this Trent Alexander goal, not even talking about the goal specifically, but also speaking specifically about the boots he's wearing in that game. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. It's the old kind of Predator boots that, if you remember, David Beckham had. It's got the long tongue where you kind of put that little band around behind the front of the shoe, and it's just that you'll remember it. You'll know if I'm speaking, you'll know 100% what I'm talking about. I think it might be in the Pepsi ad, maybe potentially, if you remember that back in the day. So. And scores, that wearing those boots and then shushing the Man City crowd, it's not for the faint-hearted. Let's put it this way, right? You've got to be a level of Trent Alexander-Arnold to be in that level, to score a goal of that level, wear a boots of that level, and then be antagonizing City fans, in that level. So great game. Obviously, we've got Erling Haaland, staple, scoring goals, consistent. I think this is going to be an interesting one. But I think I want to sort of pose to you. Did you think that was one of City's? Is that a loss for City or is that a win for Liverpool? Like, in the two, like, it was performance-wise. Did you think that was two points dropped for City, or was it the other way around?
I would say that it was probably 2 points drop for City. One, because Alexander-Arnold scores his goal in the 80th minute. So if City is able to bunker down, either get another goal or just play more defensive and shove off that Liverpool pressure, then they end up getting those 3 points. So I think that the onus is more on City, since they are leading, to stop that from happening, plus the possession statistics. So we all know that City like to have the ball under Pep Guardiola. So they had 60% possession, 40% for Liverpool. So City really dictated the play overall. And if you're going to have more possession, you're going to be passing more. And then hopefully your passing accuracy is going to be more accurate as well, which is all the case for City in that game. So I do think that they played fairly well overall. They just weren't able to put the nail in the coffin or to execute completely. So that is why, for me, I think that City drops those points. But when you are like a Jurgen Klopp side going in, you know that this is how City likes to play. So then you have to have a game plan of saying they're going to have possession. That's just how it's going to be. So we're going to have to figure out ways to combat that, to still be competitive, even though we know they're going to have the ball the majority of the time. Which overall, they created enough chances and enough opportunities. They end up having a difference maker in Trent Alexander-Arnold and scoring the goal. So I do think that City drops the points. Liverpool ends up taking the point away from City on that one. So exciting game, and we always love to see it, especially like you said, Alexander-Arnold shushing the City crowd. I'm always here for that because I hate City, and I have Liverpool still projected as my number one in the league at the end of all this.
So obviously we're talking a bit more about the top six here at the moment. Obviously you've got your United, we've discussed United, your City and Liverpool. If you remember back in a few seasons, there was also a staple top four. We're missing a club here. And that
Another blue colored team.
yeah, shockingly, it is another blue colour team, a darker blue colour team. It is, of course, Chelsea Football Club. If you remember them from back in the day, they are still playing football. They are still in the Premier League. I think they're in 10th, 11th, not sure.
10th.
Did not have a fantastic weekend of football. It's an interesting game against, let's be honest, like a solid Newcastle team. This isn't an easy fixture by any means, but you would argue the way they performed against City, you'd think that perhaps that there might be some goals in this game. You think there potentially might be some performances where if you play, it was a 4-4 game, right? Like there was. If you're back of that game, you should really be forming against a Newcastle team, being, bagging some points and getting 3 points. Unfortunately, it was a 4-1, big 4-1 loss actually for Chelsea in that game against Newcastle. Do you want to break that down for us, Andrew?
I would love to do that. And it is an interesting game to watch because first half, it ends up being tied 1-1. So Isak and Sterling get the goals in that first half. So you're going into halftime, competitive match overall. You're excited, especially if you're a Chelsea fan. And this is like kind of a top mid portion battle because both of these teams kind of on the same level of points. So Chelsea know that they need to get back to where they used to be and to win a match like this when you're competing with teams that are in the same area of you at the table. So then second half comes around and then it's just lights out. So it is a little bit going back and forth, not either team not really creating too many chances as the second half begins. But then after about 20 minutes in, and Newcastle just press the gas pedal down to the floor and just shove Chelsea out the window because they score in the 60th and the 61st minute. So then that makes it 3-1. And then from there, Chelsea don't have too many opportunities going forward. Then Reshame gets a red card. So that just pushes the morale and the probability of Chelsea getting anything from this game even further down. And then Anthony Gordon putting the nail in the coffin, making it 4-1. So it is such a weird roller coaster of a ride for Chelsea because you said sometimes they look decent, like they're fairly competitive against some of these bigger teams, but then like out of nowhere, they just get slapped 4-1 by Newcastle, which you expect those types of games to be competitive for Chelsea, which I almost feel like the vibe of Chelsea is kind of like the vibe of Manchester United. United just getting more results, but it still feels like the rosters, the club organization are just too muddled for anything positive to be happening for them.
Yeah, watching that game, I kind of slightly felt for Chelsea a little bit after that first half. It wasn't a bad performance. I don't think it was bad. I think it was like a capitulation near the end. Like you said, that 61st minute, 63rd, like that. There's something here wrong, necessarily with the club, but also your performance in that particular moment. Like there's obviously clear mistakes that have happened in that 2 to 3 minute where you essentially lost your head. We've all been there. We all play football matches. When one goal goes in, and you're always told you're at your most vulnerable when you've scored when the other team scored a goal. Like it's hard. But I just feel like something's really not clicking for Chelsea here. Like Thiago Silva coming out with an apology. Like this, I feel like at the club, but also at player level, that morale just isn't there. I felt they were going somewhere with that whole kind of Cole Palmer, Raheem Sterling. Mudryk had scored a couple. I don't know where is he injured? I'm not sure whether he scored a couple at one point. And there was just that kind of like point where I thought, okay, here we are, like Chelsea can make it back. But I do want to just flag that players are coming back for Chelsea. Nkunku I've seen him, I think he's in training at the moment. Wesley Fofana is also back as well. And there's other kind of other midfielders coming back into the fray, which is probably potentially good timing because I think Nkunku was amazing at Red Bull. I think Red Bull Salzburg. Crazy and one of the best like Bundesliga players. I know he will do great things for Chelsea. Like we know he's a solid player. He's got to do well for Chelsea. But I just think at the moment when those players come back towards that really busy Christmas run, when they do have like Manchester United, for example, playing, later on in the fixtures, I think you'll see some better performances coming out. So hopefully we'll see. I mean, hopefully loosely, but we'll see at the end of the day.
So then my question to you is, do you think those players coming back is really going to make that difference? From what you've said, it sounds like to me that you think it does.
I think so.
To me, I don't know if that is the case because like they have currently their roster, tons of talent, and they should be doing well. I don't know if adding more players into the mix will suddenly change things. I think that has to come from the management side and making sure that there is some game plan in place to get the best out of those players. And I get it, Poch like ended up just kind of getting shoved into this situation, and the players that were there, he just has to manage those types of players. But I don't know if that management is done appropriately, if he can manage those players in the direction that they need to go to be competitive. And I just think adding more to that mix now, I don't know if it makes them better. Maybe it will. Maybe Nkunku just scores a bunch of goals and that will solve problems for him, because goals solve problems for managers, and maybe that's what they need. But I don't know if that will be the case. Do you think that those addition of those players makes a difference?
I think those players in particular, I'm mainly talking about Nkunku in particular, but also Wesley Fofana in centre backs. I feel like there's that youth. They need to bring those youth back into the centre midfield, into that centre back positions. And I think just because I rate Nkunku quite highly, I feel like I think he makes pretty much any team in the Premier League better instantly, in my opinion. So when you don't have an out-and-out striker at the moment and you're struggling, you've got Cole Palmer, who, I mean, there's probably a whole episode about how Cole Palmer was at Man City, a fringe player, and is now Man City's now Chelsea's main man. Says a lot about that and the club, etc. But I feel like there's a gap here, especially in the front line, for him to kind of come into play here. And I think that will free up more midfielders, make better Raheem Sterling come into his own a bit more. Cole Palmer left and right. Like, I think he will really help. Lukaku really help that player, that midfield and that strike in particular. So I agree. I think I totally understand. I think adding more players, but for me, Lukaku isn't just a player. I think he's a different player that I think will add a different dynamic to this Chelsea squad, which I think Pochettino really needs, and especially with the rotation towards the end of Christmas, you've got fixture after fixture. I think he'll help them, and I think he'll do really well there. So, fingers crossed purely for Nkunku here.
That's a good point too. Having depth is so important in a squad. So being able to at least have some more depth, I think, is always positive. Then it will just come down to how Poch manages everything appropriately, if he can get the best out of his players, which I hope so. I'm here for more competitiveness at the top of the table, which, I mean, maybe they'll just bring that competitiveness to the middle of the table, which is where they're sitting right now. So we'll see what happens. But we're going to keep talking about Chelsea, but flip the script a little bit, because we're talking about the women's side. They have recently kind of lost a coach. So their manager, Emma Hayes, is going to be moving on, but she's not moving on quite yet because she's finishing off the season. Then she goes to her new gig, which I am very excited about, because she's coming across the pond. She's leaving you. She's coming over to hang out with me. She is going to be the official new women's team manager for our United States national squad. I am quite excited about this because I think she is one of the two best women's managers in the game right now, and it is sorely needed for our U.S. women's national team. The problem with what we've been seeing recently with Andonovski, our former manager, we've had him for a couple cycles of different tournaments, and I was not the biggest fan because he continued to lean on some of those old stars, which, as an example, Alex Morgan, still an amazing player. She's still like one of the true number 9s that we have on a roster, but then being able to phase out some of those older players. Megan Rapinoe, as an example, she just did not do well in the World Cup because she probably didn't need to be on that roster. I get like trying to do the farewell thing. That's fine. You can live your life that way if you need to, maybe in a less important tournament. But now Emma Hayes has the responsibility and already is doing the things to get rid of, phasing out some of those older players, introducing some type of new flair, new formations, and then adjusting players into different places on the pitch as well, which she's done a lot at Chelsea. So I'm so excited to see what she's going to bring to the table. And I'm curious to hear your perspective on this as an Englander. Do you think this is a cool move for her because it is quite impactful for the women's game? Are you sad to see her leaving Chelsea because she really built a dynasty there? What does it look like for you?
I think, first and foremost, I think she's a great manager. I think there is, if you hear her on commentary, I think we've got some commentators here in sort of the UK and the British football, in particular, when it comes to like England games, for example. When you have Emma Hayes as your co-commentator, I've heard her in loads of like Sevens friendlies, England friendlies, for example. She just knows what she's talking about. There's just a different aspect, different dynamic to the game. So I think it is a big miss for sure for Chelsea and English football in particular. But I think it also does, ironically, a lot for English football because a manager of that level is going to the US. It says a lot. The US team is is arguably one of the best footballing teams in the world, I would argue, right? Like they had a run of so many World Cups, unbelievable World Cups. And it just feels like it's, for me, seems like a great match. It feels like Emma Hayes can really bring in that kind of that English football, that kind of heritage of Chelsea Football Club, for example, also, and working with some incredible players at Chelsea to bring it into the national team. I feel like the national team is a very different gig to a club level football. Like it's a very different prospect. There's more pressure in a shorter amount of time. You've basically got a tournament to prove yourself. If you don't, that's it. And it feels like there's a lots of different egos in there as well. With the club, you have the kind of transfer window maybe, or you feel like you can get players out. It feels like here, if a player's really good and they are obviously from the same nationality, you kind of need to keep them in there because they're in the same. They work with the squad, etc. You spoke about with Megan Rapinoe, for example. So I think it's a great move. I think it'll do fantastic for the prospect of women's football, specifically in the US, and also women's football in general. I think it's fantastic. So I really do wish her the best of luck. I think it'll be fantastic to see, and obviously will be fun of following her here. Hopefully she doesn't do it as well against, say, England teams. Let's just be real. But we'll see. Fingers crossed to her.
I will say, I mentioned when I was talking about this to start off, Emma Hayes, she's one of the best two. I think the other best manager on the women's side right now is actually England's national team manager,
Sarah Wiegman.
Yeah, she's good. So the US, when they were doing interviews and talking to potential candidates, they had talked about wanting to introduce Wiegman and have that conversation, but the English Federation said, don't even talk to her. Don't even think about it. Which is so funny, which is
I had some rumors about potentially her going to doing men's football and becoming a manager of potential, not England men's squad or other potential England. I would love to see that. I would genuinely, the day we have like a woman coach, a female coach in sort of England Premier League, would be such an incredible feeling just to watch her on the sidelines, to have that impact. It would be such a great start for women managers all across to see that we now have a women manager in the traditionally men's Premier League. I think the day that happens, it'll be such a great time. I'd love to see that one day. I think there's a couple of managers that can make that happen. Sarah Wiegman is one of them, and also Emma Hayes is another one. They're two managers that I think, in my opinion, do a better job than, say, for example, Vincent Kompany, for example, or even Pochettino. You know what I mean? These sorts of things. So I'd love to see it. So fingers crossed one day.
I am actually surprised that that's not happened sooner, because the cool part, I've talked about this before, I think on our podcast, and I talk about it all the time. The game of men's versus women's, it's just so comparable. You use the same formations, the same strategies, the same tactics. The players operate in the same ways. So the only difference you'll have is just the physiques of men versus women. So you'll have a little bit more speed and a little bit more aggression in terms of body style on the men's side, but really that's it. So that is why it is so beautiful to be able to see these two types of games working together. And with that being said, I think that the transition from men's to women's would be fine. I don't think a manager would have any issue going from a men's or women's and vice versa. And you see on the women's side, there are a decent amount of men managers that manage women's teams. So I don't know why we don't see more women managing on the men's side, because really tactically, organizational wise, it's the same. So I'm here for that. I know it's a little tangent from talking about Emma Hayes, but I am here for that. And I think it should have happened sooner. And I don't know why it doesn't, which is just a weird thing to me.
I agree. I think it's a case of times are changing, and I think that is a key part of it. I think it's one of those ones where perhaps it may be a case that it just takes one sort of female manager to hit to Premier League, and I think that it begins a whole different wave of managers from different areas coming into play. And speaking of the women's football, I was just going to go into the next part, as I was going to sort of really quickly sort of jump in on as well, is as we're talking about the value of the women's team is increasing as well. Recently has come out that the FA Cup, the Women's FA Cup, their prize money has doubled to 6 million, which is fantastic to see. And that again is heading in the right direction. And we can definitely see that there is more and more a bigger influence from the women's game happening. And that kind of leads me to speak a little bit more about the grit you talked about. And we spoke earlier about Trent Alexander-Arnold shushing the fans. And what I wanted to pose to you potentially is that grit? Like, we saw Chloe Haley on the weekend shush the fans. Do we need to see more of that? Do we need to see more of that kind of, I don't know how to say it. I think we here in the UK, we call it ishhousery, right? Where it's almost like you're playing with the fans, etc. It should be more be done from the women's side. Is that a big part of it?
I mean, I'm always here for that. And I know like a lot of players do that as well. I think it maybe just doesn't happen as frequently, or maybe we just don't see it as frequently. So one of those, it was actually England and the US. They were playing in some tournament and Alex Morgan runs up to the English crowd and she just like sips the tea. I'm here for
yeah,
that.
I remember
Like,
that.
so good. That's like my favorite all-time celebration. So that's so cool. So I'm here for that. Like that kind of stuff makes it more fun, more exciting. You get the crowd riled up, which then ultimately makes a better atmosphere for all the players involved. It just makes it much more of a spectacle. It's more fun. And I think like I'm always here for chaos. So if you can provide me more chaos in a game to make it more exciting, I'm here for that. So I do think that from the men's and women's side, bring it on. I'm always here for that kind of stuff. One thing I do want to mention about Emma Hayes and what you talked about, so the prize money being doubled, which is so great. The other big part about Emma Hayes coming to the US is not only how solid she is and how amazing it is, but her pay is going to be quite substantial. So she is now getting paid in line with what Greg Berhalter is getting paid. So he gets paid as the men's national team. So she is making almost the same as what he is making as her salary. So just to put this kind of in perspective, so she is being appointed and her new contract is $1.6 million a year. That's what she's going to be getting paid. And I know I had already talked about it, but she's going to be leaving Chelsea at the end of that season. And then she's going to be signing and completing her long-term deal with the U.S. women's national team. So another kind of perspective piece. So Vlatko Andonovski, he was the former U.S. women's national team who got booted after not performing well at all in the World Cup, which makes sense. But he is earning, when he was the women's national team manager, he earned 3 times less than what Hayes is going to be making. So not only important for Emma Hayes, but also important for the game of women's soccer, because making sure that women are paid equally and fairly, especially for the job that they're doing, like you're managing the best national team organization in the world, in my opinion, because of the legacy and all the World Cups that the women's national team here in the U.S. has won, then getting paid conservatively, or whatever that word is, to equal what the job is that you're doing just makes sense, especially comparing that to the men's national team's manager's salary. Like that should be almost equal because the women are performing better. So it's awesome to see that. I think that is so important for the women's side too. So I'm so glad that that is actually happening. And I feel so happy that like the US is helping lead that charge, because we haven't been the best in terms of that. And the US Federation has been in a lawsuit for like 5 years for the equal pay thing, which finally ended, thankfully, in a positive way for equal pay. But yeah, it's good to see that the U.S. finally taking shape and doing what should be done and making equal pay a thing and actually paying Emma Hayes what she's worth and what that position entails. So that's just so exciting. I'm so glad to see that.
I think we're heading in the right direction. Well, for sure, right? Like that, as you spoke about, is huge. I think it may not make the headlines, but I think it's huge for women's football, but also football in general. Like we're finally be able to see that disparity begin to break away a little bit. And it does a lot for the sport, but also shows that there is massive value in this. And you have to put your money where your mouth is when it comes to, unfortunate, as much as you spoke about, we feel like it's equal. The quality is sometimes potentially better in some of these games. It feels like the value money needs to be behind it. And that I think will also lead to more potential, like some more corporations back in the women's game, for example, more money in that, for example, more kind of sponsorships for Emma Hayes, for example. And then you're going to see more of the increase in women's football across from the UK and across the world internationally and the US as well. So really, really great to see.
Yeah, I am certainly here for that. And I'm so stoked that we have such a solid manager on our hands now. Now, let us move on to an interesting topic that we discussed off camera a little bit to try to talk about perspective. And I think we have different perspectives, which I'm always here for, which makes it exciting. We're talking Euros, which Euros are coming up. We're always loving big tournaments and that tournament action. But Norway did not make it. And you are of the impression that that's stupid and they should be making it because they have two of the best players in the world, which I don't disagree. They have two stellar players. And then I'm of more of the perspective of it saying their team surrounding those two great players are just not as good. So talk to me about your view of why you think Norway should be making these major
Yeah.
tournaments.
So it's an interesting one. It's not necessarily just Norway as well. I feel this, and I'm gonna throw it back here to the Ballon d'Or here. I remember we spoke quite highly about Erling Haaland and potentially winning that side of it. And there's no, before I get into the caveat of this, there's no denying that Erling Haaland is one of the best, if not the best footballer in the world right now. Let's just clarify that. However, those performances for me, as much as they are like at like club level, they should also be bought into his Euro performances and what you do for your country. If you look at Messi, for example, what he's done for his country, like, I mean, granted, he is in a much better, we can't really compare Norway and Argentina, but still, his performances have sometimes been the massive difference in a team stacked. And Argentina stacked with players. Messi has been the difference, key maker in that, in the key person in that space. So I feel like for me, I was looking at the Euro, I was looking at all the clubs that had made it through into the net, and also looking in the past as well. So I was looking at some of the eras. North Macedonia, last 2020, 2021 Euros, for example, they were in that space. And I don't remember they've got many players that I can think of a list of anyway within that North Macedonia. Alioski, I think, used to play for Leeds, for example. I think he now plays for Saudi Arabian team, potentially, in that space. So North Macedonia from before. If you go a bit further back, 2014, we had Bosnia and Herzegovina, like Miralem Pjanic, and won a couple of other players in that space. And this year we've got Romania, I think, have made it. I'm just thinking about some of these clubs and some of these teams where we can't really necessarily name players, but you've got arguably two of the best midfield. Odegaard is one of the best midfielders in the Premier League, and also you've got, I think, Sander Berge, who's also a centre back as well, plays for Brentford, or midfielder, plays for Brentford. I mean, great player again for Norway as well, and obviously Erling Haaland as well. In a granted, it was in a difficult group, but still I feel these sorts of clubs and these sorts of like teams, general national teams, and Erling Haaland should really be making the Euro. That's another tournament that Erling Haaland isn't part of it. In my opinion, if he wins Ballon d'Or and say Harry Kane, shouldn't Harry Kane be in that question, in my opinion? Because if Harry Kane, say, for example, wins the Euros with England or gets them to the semi-finals, even finals again, and obliterates the Bundesliga, which is practically on the way to, doesn't that make Harry Kane a more of a Ballon d'Or winner than Erling Haaland, in my opinion? I'm just saying, like, you have to put the club and country together, and Norway should be doing better, in my opinion, and Erling Haaland should be doing better at his country level. But hey, that's just my opinion. I just feel like there's got to be something. There's going to be some give and take here. Again, not to say that Erling Haaland isn't a great footballer. I just feel like Norway should have done better, and it's another tournament we're not going to see Erling Haaland at. What does that say for Ballon d'Ors? Just saying.
Well, I'll yell about the Ballon d'Or forever because I think it's still stupid. They did not follow the exact criteria that they've set out for themselves when they selected Messi over Haaland, which we've already yelled about that in previous episodes. So if you want to go listen back to me yelling about that, feel free to do so. I would agree with you when we're talking about Ballon d'Or stuff. Kane will probably have a good shout to be able to be that Ballon d'Or next season if he continues his form in the Bundesliga, as well as does some good stuff for England. I think the issue with the international thing is that if your team makes it to a major tournament, then as the player in the conversation for the Ballon d'Or, they have more opportunities to do important things for their squad. Now, if your team doesn't make it, then that just means, yes, you have less opportunity for you to be able to be impactful, to show more people that you can and should be the Ballon d'Or. So I feel like it should be weighted a little bit, but I think everyone overweights. They put more weight onto the international side of players when it's not fully that player's responsibility to get a team to whatever major tournament we're talking about. So now let me answer the second part of what you had talked about. Ballon d'Or stupid. We're done with that. Now, if we're talking about Norway specifically and how they should be getting to major tournaments, I think that it is tough because they don't have a intense squad of good players. They have a competitive enough squad where they did get third in their group, so they were one off from being able to qualify underneath of Scotland. I think they were like 4 points away. So ultimately, I do think Haaland is great. I think Odegaard, like you, he's one of the best midfielders in the world. But with that, the rest of their roster is really just not up to par with, I think, the rest of the world. And I think that has to go with like the FIFA rankings too. You kind of see that. So like really, two all-star players, can they carry their team to these major tournaments? It looks like the answer is no. So I will then say, I think that shows the importance of having depth in your squad, in your team, and it shows it's great to have star players, and you want to have star players. You have to have them to make an impact at the highest level of stages, for sure. We've seen that. We've talked about that earlier in what we were talking about with the Premier League. But if you don't have those key role players that can perform their roles in a very important and impactful way, then you're just not going to be able to be as good and competitive as the other teams that are in your bracket that are competing for those top places in the world. I just don't think that Norway has that squad depth and ability. But you disagree with that?
I'm just going to put two teams out there for you really quickly. I'm going to say Gareth Bale and the Wales squad. I know, I watch a lot of English football. A lot of that team is championship footballers. A lot of the players is, granted, maybe Aaron Ramsey from back in the day. Who else was there? There was the player who played for Liverpool, Joe Allen. There's a couple of players in there, but Gareth Bale technically single-handed carried that team. And then, this one's a less good example, but I'm just going to throw out Lewandowski for Poland, right? These again are teams that I think on paper probably don't make it, yet they are in a big enough tournaments, World Cup tournaments, Euros tournaments, for example. So I'm just thinking, how do we explain not carrying sides when I would argue that Gareth Bale carried Wales? Erling Haaland should be able to, in my opinion, to carry Norway. And if you're 1-0 down against Scotland, who has probably two or three, let's do Scotland and Norway as two teams, right? If you put them on paper, there's probably more known players in Scotland team, but Norway have arguably better players. So how does that match up then? Surely.
I will say that Wales actually had a pretty good squad. So they like had Aaron Ramsey, Ben Davies, Kiefer Moore, Brennan Johnson, Nico Williams. So like they had some players like that are in the Premier League. So I would say like Gareth Bale, good, but I don't think he fully carried that Wales team. So I think if I'm comparing that Wales team to the Norway team, I think that Wales team is better overall if you're comparing like individual position versus individual position. So that's for me like why I think it is so important to have like a roster of solid players. They don't have to be stars. You want to have, again, some of those stars plugged in there. Like you have to have those role players. And I think that's the problem we're talking about with Chelsea, with Manchester United. What they go out and they do and they try to sign these big players, but then they forget about needing to have those role players. Brennan Johnson, talking about him, perfect example. He is a signing for Tottenham. Tottenham went out and signed him. He's not the flashy striker, didn't cost them a ton of money, but he is a good substitute striker / winger, an attacker that can be used in specific roles. And that goes out and shows because he has been able to perform well for Tottenham. So he's not going to be this most flashy goal scorer out there, but he's going to provide value in the specific role that he does. So for me, that is what I think is lacking from Norway. They just don't have those role players able to perform their specific roles and those tasks in a way that will support Haaland and Odegaard as they would need to be the most competitive team as possible. So I think overall, the teams that we're comparing to Norway, they just have more depth and better role players as to what Norway does. Plus, like I'm on the standings page for UEFA. They don't even have some of the players with pictures on Norway's roster. Now, that's probably just the UEFA's problem, but maybe that's saying something.
When I'm referring to the Welsh team, I'm just looking up here, and I'm referring to the 2016 team. So the team currently 100%, I think, is paper. But I'm looking at like Wayne Hennessy, James Chester, Davis, Gunter, Allen, Ledley, Ramsey, Taylor, Bale, Robson, Carnu. That's that team that beat Belgium, for example. Remember that 3-1, which was crazy, that result was. I'm thinking back to those players. I totally agree with you. I think there's probably more depth that needs to be had. I just feel like when are we going to start excusing like these teams that we think should be performing better with players Like if you look at like, I mean, again, I can't really compare because if you look at it, like I was putting Ronaldo in there for a second, but Ronaldo's Portugal team is way better. You can't argue that Ronaldo carried anything but you could argue that Ronaldo is a gem in that squad. He still has maybe 8 out of 10 players, 8 out of 10s all around him, but he is like an 11 out of 10 player in a squad of 8 out of 10. That takes a lot in itself. Granted, Ronaldo is a different breed of player, but I just feel like, and maybe we'll see in the next couple of like seasons, and maybe what happens is Erling Haaland listens to our podcast and goes, "Do you know what? I see what they're saying. I get that. I'm going to be better. I'm going to carry my squad, all right." And maybe we see him lifting the Euros. Who knows, right? But it's an interesting one. I mean, again, there's nothing to detract away from me. He's a fantastic player. I just feel like when it comes to the Ballon d'Ors and we look at overall credentials, right? If we look at Ronaldo and Messi credentials, and Erling Haaland is apparently meant to be in that space, cool, I get it. But Mbappe, I get it. Performing well for his country, World Cup, cool, I get it. These players have international credentials. I'm gonna leave this with, when is Haaland going to have that international, even European credential that is going to see him amongst one of the world's best or some of the world's best? That's what I'm gonna say.
I just don't think that for me, I can ever put a negative vibe onto a player just because he happened to be born and have the nationality of a sucky international team. Like that just happens. You don't have a choice, and that's just chance of where you're born and who your parents are. So I don't think that I'm going to ever punish any player or like Haaland specifically just because he was born into a team that is just not going to be as competitive because they don't have the depth and they don't have those role players. So for me, that's what I think the issue is. But let me roll through really quickly the teams that ended up qualifying for the Euros. So we have Group A, Spain, Scotland over Norway, who got third. France and Netherlands over Greece, which makes sense, who end up being third. England, Italy, getting out of the group of Ukraine, North Macedonia, Malta, makes sense. Group D, a little bit more interesting. Turkey finishes in first. Then we have Croatia, Wales in third, not making it. Albania and Chechnya, here we go, in first and second. Poland in third. So let me talk about Poland very quickly. I will agree that Lewandowski did end up providing a lot of value for Poland, but they also did have some players that were quite competitive. Blaszczykowski, he played for Borussia Dortmund. He was a great right winger, wing back kind of player, right mid. They had some other decent players that were playing in the top 5 leagues. So they weren't amazing, but they were strong role players, and they were able to play their roles effectively to make Poland fairly competitive. Then if you have those right role players where they need to be, that makes your stars be able to shine, like Lewandowski being able to do that. So I think that is important. Talking about Group F, Belgium, Austria, over top of Sweden. I think that makes sense. Those are probably the 2 best teams. Hungary, Serbia in Group G, first and second over Montenegro, Lithuania, Bulgaria. Group H, Denmark, Slovenia, knocking out Finland, who makes it to third. Looks about right. Romania and Switzerland, first and second over Israel and Belarus. Probably makes sense. Group J, Portugal is first and Slovakia is second over Luxembourg and Iceland. So overall, I think the best teams really did make it through. Once in a while, you'll get those Cinderella stories. But I would say that I think those teams that did make it overall have the best depth. Do you disagree?
I agree. I think I totally agree with you. The only things that I was really kind of quizzical about was that kind of Romanian team. I think they did them particularly well in their group, but also the likes of Scotland in that Spain-Norway team. I feel like Norway kind of should have maybe come second in that one. Spain weren't even playing that well. If you look at their fixtures, their results wasn't amazing. And if you look at Scotland, it's genuinely, jokes aside, I mean, I love to see it as a Man United fan, but McTominay has literally fully carried that Scottish team. Like if you look at some of the goals he scored, it's crazy. I love to see it, and I love to see it for Manchester United as well. So it's great to see. So I think that's really great to see as well. But even for me, it was a shock that Croatia was second in that, and Turkey. I mean, growing up, it was really great to see the likes of Turkey performing well at like World Cups and Euros. I always used to sort of like enjoy watching the Burak Yilmaz, for example, these sorts of players, and It's really great to see Turkey in that space again. I think it's great. I think Turkish football at the moment is having a bit of a renaissance. If you look at Fenerbahce and Galatasaray, some of their squads are crazy at the moment. So really great to see. So I'm looking forward to Euros. I think I saw a post about 7 months, 6 months away. Next summer, we're back. Euros. England, favourites apparently. Kane hitting the heady heights in Bundesliga. Is that going to carry through again? So, I'm really excited for this one next year. It's going to be a fun tournament, and I think it's going to throw up some surprises, and I think we'll see some great games. So I'm looking forward to that.
So before I take us away from the Euros, I have a last closing question for you as an Englishman. Saying that the English national team are favorites, does that make you nervous at all?
Oh, massively. Oh, 100%. Of course, because every time we call favorites, we just never perform.
Right.
Like, it just feels like we just never perform. And I feel like it almost makes us not necessarily complacent, but it does make us feel like we are probably better than we think we are. And people would agree, people listen to the podcast, a lot of my uncles say this as well, and we don't really got tested. And when we are tested, we're against, for example, the Nations League, when we're against the Netherlands, I think it was a couple of like double headers where it was like a semi-final and a final against your Nations League. We get caught out when we play against anything above the top five. Your France's, your Belgium's, your Spain's. We just don't really perform well. We had an unbeaten run into this Euros, but if you look at some of the players, some of the teams in that, it's not good enough. It's not good enough of a challenge for us as an England team when you meet big teams against that. So 100% nervous. I mean, yeah, I don't think that. Let me not say it. Let me not put it into the atmosphere. But we'll see next summer.
Love it. Well, I'll be watching. Euros are always a good time, even for us, like U.S. soccer fans over here. We love to watch it, even though you guys don't let us compete in it. It's fine. We understand. But let us continue talking about Erling Haaland for just a minute, because I want to hit you with my take it or leave it. Erling Haaland should be started in FPL, Fantasy Premier League, and captained every week, no matter what. You taking it or you leaving it?
So my gut is telling me there's only one answer to this, and this is yes. But if I'm going to be balanced on this, it's still a yes. I'm going to be honest with you. There's nothing telling me not to, and I think it's because even against Liverpool, where you probably don't see him as captain, he still scores. And I think numbers wise, he has one bad game like every 10 games. I don't think the other captain choices just aren't there. There's no one as consistent even then either. Like, if, say, for example, Erling Haaland doesn't exist in the game, who takes his spot? I can't think in my mind who probably does. There isn't a player as consistent as him right now. So I'm 100% going to take it. There is, and that's what I made the mistake of doing as a fantasy football player myself. There's been 1 week I've not captained him, and it was a bad week for me. And ever since then, I've captained him, and it's been a good week. People around me have been trying to be a little bit different, trying to do different captains, and it's not going right for them. So, we stay with Haaland. We trust in Haaland. That's what I'm going to say.
I will also take this one because I unfortunately did not captain him this past week, and I put him on the bench because he was potentially injured. I'm like, let me do something different. Let me try to captain someone else, get some extra points, maybe try to beat out my competition. It never works doing that. Haaland always scores or contributes in some way where he gets at least 5 points, which is what you need and what you want to have from every player on your roster. So I'm going to take this one. From now on, I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to having Haaland in my team and captaining him going forward.
I think it's just so much easier mentally just to forget that there is another captain. So I back in the day when I used to play, I was like, oh, who should I captain? Choices. There's such a choice, big choice. What should I do? Now it's one less decision I need to make. So I'm going to stick with Haaland. But thinking about moving away from Man City for 1 second, I'm going to throw into Liverpool and Arsenal as two clubs here. My take or leave it to you is Liverpool are stronger title contenders than Arsenal. Were you taking or leaving it?
Yeah, I'm taking that. I took this take from the very beginning when we did our Premier League predictions. I think that Liverpool is a very good team. They did smart signings over the past 2-3 years, and they're not one of the teams that are going to go out and sign all these crazy players like a Chelsea, like a Man City. Actually, Man City actually does. They make smart signings. So like a Chelsea or a Man United, they don't just spend money to spend money. They spend money where they need it. And they also sign role players, which I've talked about so much in this podcast, but they do that. So does City. They sign smart players. They'll still go out and say, okay, we'll spend some cash on maybe this player or this player because they're really good. But then we'll also know, all right, this player needs to be signed to fulfill the rest of our midfield needs because we have this type of midfielder. Now we're going to need this other type of midfielder to play in a low defensive block that's more defensive. So they know how to sign players. And that's showing as well. They are a solid team. They're able to compete with every team in the league right now. So I do think that they are going to be better than Arsenal. I think that they're going to be better than City. They're going to be at the top of the table when all is said and done. The only wild card for me is Tottenham. They had that strong run. They've kind of fallen off a little bit, but maybe they'll pick things back up. I love watching it. Tottenham, they're such a fun team to watch now with Postecoglou leading the charge for that. But I will stick with my prediction at the very beginning. And it's looking strong right now. We just got to get through the hard Christmas time. But yes, I'm saying Liverpool for the top spot in the Premier League, better than Arsenal. I'm taking it.
I mean, very valid points there, but I just feel like Arsenal have got perhaps a bit more of that squad depth, I personally think. I think if they've also got players that haven't really hit the ground yet, like Martinelli isn't really scoring that much. If he gets into play, I mean, Odegaard hasn't really scored games, but he's still creating. You've got your Jesus, for example. You got your Ben White in defense, like solid like players, like Declan Rice. I just feel like when it comes into grinding out those 1-0s, for example, later on in the season, I think Liverpool don't necessarily do that. A couple of injuries and Liverpool just don't click. But a couple of injuries, and I feel like Arsenal still grind out that they were out without Saka for a couple of games. They're still grinding out that 1-0s against Brentford, etc. I think Saka might have been back, but they're I don't feel that there's depth in them more then. I see them a bit more of a push for City than I do Liverpool. Liverpool, I think, can push City, but I feel Arsenal can push City more. But hey, that's what it is. Take it or leave it. Should we run on to our final nutmegs of the week? Do you want to kick us off with the start? What you got for us?
Yes, this one is quite intense, and this is probably a topic we'll be talking about in future episodes as well. But my nutmeg of the week is that the Premier League giving Everton a 10-point deduction when Man City is able to run free with over 100 violations. So that 10-point deduction now shoves Everton down into the relegation zone, which is disappointing for Everton, especially with the history being in the Premier League. But this was done by an independent commission from the Premier League and imposed with immediate effect, and that is the largest in history of the Premier League. So I really just don't think that if you are going to punish Everton for whatever their sustainability and whatever the financial thing that they've done, which I don't know enough about that quite yet. If they've done wrong stuff, okay, punish them. However, if you're going to give them the harshest one in Premier League history and then still just let whatever's happening with City and their over 100 violations just live along and do what they're doing, it's not fair. I'm not a fan of it. I just don't think that it's right. I love what Everton was doing to protest. They had the signs that they were holding up at the games. They hired someone to fly a plane over the City ground during the City's one of their recent games, saying that the Premier League is corrupt and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I'm disappointed. That is certainly my nutmeg of the week.
Very fair. And I think this is a very much a developing story. I think we're going to see massive fallouts from this, from other clubs. So I feel like this nutmeg is probably going to become an episode in itself. So looking forward to that one. So my nutmegged is going to be a funny story, actually. So I'm going to run a little story past you, right? So this throws back. So there was a Nigerian midfielder, right, called Chibuke Nwewu, right? So he was declared missing, right, by reigning NPL, so Nigerian champions, right, and Yimba FC earlier in the week, right? However, there's been some confirmed reports, right, that he's been spotted training with a new team, right? So there's been some reports. Apparently, he's playing at the moment for a club in Israel, right? There's no reports are coming out at the moment. So apparently, there's been no reports from either club that any official transfer was actually done. So he's now just managed to just pick up where he was left off in a Nigerian, the reigning champions, and just started playing in Israel somewhere. I mean, it's hilarious nutmeg for both teams because I'm in trying like what has the each team doesn't know what, who knows what is my question. Also, how does that happen in the 21st century that we're like, how does that happen? How does a player just leave and just start playing for another team, considered missing for one club, and now just be playing football in another club or training with another club? So pretty hilarious of a nutmeg, but there you go.
Yeah, that's quite weird. I'm not sure how that contract was written, because if he's like playing for another team, technically he would be in violation. So then he would be required to pay back salaries, all this kind of stuff. Granted, that does depend on how you structure the contract. Maybe he found a loophole in the contract and was saying, wow, this team sucks. Good thing they didn't give me a legit contract. Now I can go somewhere else. Wow. Quite a nutmeg to not be organized enough for your squads.
There you go.
That's quite funny. But all right, fam, thanks for joining us. We will see you in 2 weeks. Before then, make sure you jump on our Instagram account at Nutmegged Podcast. DM us with your listener questions or your take it or leave it submissions. Hopefully you're able to get out on a pitch somewhere. If you do, just don't get nutmegged. Peace.
Peace, guys. See you later.